Simon and the Forgiving Few, I'm a recently retired police officer, and I feel I can now, more than 40 years later, admit my early misdemeanours. This confession goes back to the summer of 1976, when I was an electrical mechanic in the Royal Navy. Cozy Powell was in the charts at this time with a number of hits, and so having the same surname, my nickname obviously became Cozy. I had two friends, Happy and Smokey. Sounds like they're all dwarfs with Snow White. Anyway, we're at the Isle of Wight on HMS Antelope. That's what we were doing. Cozy, Happy and Smokey, having a good time. One weekend, Happy, Smokey and I went to Sandown to savour the nightlife on offer. The evening went well, meeting the local ladies and drinking the local brew to extraordinary levels. The end of the evening arrived and we were forced from the nightclub at around 2 a.m. The only issue at this time was getting back to Cowes and back on the ship by 6 a.m. when night leave finished and the ship prepared to sail for the day. We were fighting through the drunken fog of important decision-making. Did we want fish and chips or a Chinese? When a car pulled up and a driver offered us a lift back. We jumped in and had a charming conversation with the driver, who was our knight in shining armour. Bob, as he said he was called, said he lived in the middle of the island and would drop us off where we could get a taxi, saving us half the fare. Seemed like a good deal. Further burbling conversation was held until we found ourselves on some very dark roads with no streetlights and the crest of a hill approaching. As we reached a small crossroads, Bob declared he lived to the left, and if we got out here, we could get a taxi or thumb a lift at the main road just over the hill. "Thanks, Bob, you're a hero," we said, followed by lots of waving and cheering as Bob disappeared along a country lane, leaving us in the dark, and we walked on eagerly. Father Simon, as we reached the crest of the hill, and not the main road we were expecting, we were greeted by a landscape of complete and total darkness, spreading miles and miles ahead of us, and a quick look back saw the taillight of Bob's car disappearing cheerfully in the distance. We then came to the conclusion that maybe he wasn't a knight in shining armour at all, and possibly a chap who thought that a trick on some sailors would be a jolly good idea. Anyway, it was now 3 a.m. and we had 3 hours to be back on the ship or there'd be some serious trouble. We started to walk on, intent on flagging down a lift or getting to a phone box. There were no mobiles back in those days, and to our distress, there were no phone boxes. There was no traffic. There were no buildings. On we walked, starting to worry about being able to get back on the ship before 6 a.m., knowing we couldn't let the defence of the realm be put at risk by Bob's sense of humour, or maybe we were trying our best to avoid a charge of being absent without leave, whatever. It was then we came across a solitary house. What to do? Rouse the family who lived there and ask to use their phone, or even ask for a lift back? Smokey was convinced the wake-up call wouldn't be welcomed by the family, and in that moment a poor decision was made. You see, we spied 2 children's bicycles on the lawn outside the house. One was for an 8-year-old, the other a lot smaller, about a 5-year-old. Not thinking twice, we carefully lifted the 2 bikes from the front garden and made off with them. However, the issue was that there were 3 of us and only 2 bikes, and neither of the bikes were capable of coping with a bakkie for adults. So we decided the one who was on the cycle, Smokey, would go 100 yards, then leave the bike and run on, while another, me, would run after him, pick up the bike and cycle past the runner for 100 yards and so on, stabilizers and everything. The third one of us would scoot on the small cycle for as long as possible, so Happy is not so happily scooted. We were now fugitives in fear that sounds like a really rubbish system of, why don't you just run? Anyway, we were now fugitives in fear that the owners might rise, notice the bikes were missing and go out looking for us, or the police could have been called and would be scouring the island for the local bike thieves. Whilst we were making our way back, any sign of headlights, we would hide in the bushes, then resume the madness of running, cycling and scooting. After what seemed like hours, we found signs to Newport and cautiously made our way through the outskirts of town. We could now find a taxi to get back to the ship. We saw the local police station and stealthily, and believing we were doing the right thing, we put the bikes next to the police station front door in the hope that they would be returned to the owner. We didn't actually work out how they would know who they belonged to, but that was for someone else to be concerned with. We got our lift and arrived back on board at 5:55 a.m, 5 minutes to spare. No arrests, no absent without leave, no issues apart from a huge sense of guilt which has hung over me for the last 40 years. Since that day, I've always worried that the bikes were not reunited with the owners. I therefore have to seek forgiveness from the children, who may well have been distressed to find that their bikes were missing in the morning, the parents who would have to console them, and the local police for raising the crime figures on the Isle of Wight. I put myself at the mercy of the forgiving few for absolution. This is Cozy Pal, friend of Happy and Smokey and Bike Thief, for which I think Bobby will be stern and unforgiving. We'll get to her in a moment after Joe.
Okay, as I was listening to this, I'm catching up with a very English scandal. Is that the proper title of that programme?
That's exactly the image that I had in my head as well.
And the scene with the dog?
Yes.
Yep, that's exactly where my head was.
And the lonely road?
Yeah, and the lonely road and being stranded on a moor. That's exactly what was going on in my head as I was listening to that story. But moving on from that, I haven't seen the third episode yet, I don't see how you could not forgive this, because they were obviously treated very badly by Bob, who was not a very nice man at all. They were stranded in the dark at the crossroads. There were sailors. They had to get back onto their ship. Obviously, it was Smokey's idea to steal the bikes in the first place, to liberate the bikes in the first place. But they did make the effort to get to the police station. They left the bikes there. And if the family woke up in the morning and their bikes weren't there, they would have gone to the police station and said, we've lost their bikes. Oh, look, there they are. Perfect. And this was a comedic farce of hilarious proportions. So, Cozy Pal, you are forgiven.
Sister Bobby, what do you say there?
Well, I'm halfway with Joe, abducted, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. And of course, great, here's an alternative. The thing is, what I don't forgive you for is you had the address, you knew where the bikes come from. You never thought of sending them a postcard and said your bikes are there. And actually what you should have done is done a collection between the three of them and sent money through for new bikes. It would have been that would have been the right thing to do.
Yes.
If you borrowed the bikes, because of course you didn't take them back. So effectively, you stole them, even temporarily, you stole the bikes. That's what you did. So you're not forgiven because you stole the bikes and you didn't really fix it in the right way. So not forgiven.
Oh, no, do you think the tyres might have been flat after that by any chance?
Well, I'm sure the bikes were little, were
not
worn out.
Not built for grown men, were they?